Good morning. It is so great to be with you this morning here in God's church. And I've been looking forward to it all week, although the week's just gone like that for me, just so quick. But that's what happens when you move into spring. Everything seems to just jump. I got chickens hatching this morning, would you believe? They're 2 days early. But hey, God said there's time for them to come this morning, and they said, we're coming to greet the Sabbath. And I've got 3 beautiful little black ones. They're darlings. And I just love spring. Well, this week has been pretty busy. Made lots of mistakes, lots of lessons, and lots of great experiences. And one was I had an experience where I knew it was a God moment. You know how you can just tell those? It was Wednesday morning. Drove the car down to the Bassendean site there at the True Blue Oval in the car park. Parked it in its right spot, and I was running a little bit late, but a couple of people there gave me a hand to get set up on my own there, and feeling a little bit sorry for myself. Sometimes I hate being alone. If there's one fear I've got, it's being on my own. I hate it. I'm a people person. I love being with people. That's why I'm firing up this morning, because I'm with you guys. I'm there on my own, setting up and feeding the people and that. And towards the end of it, things are quieting down. And this guy who I hadn't seen before came up to me, and he chose some various dishes. And I made him up a nice plate of food. And he got talking, and he sat on the trailer. And I was behind the tables and started talking about his life and about God and about how crook he was. And I said to him, do you know God? He said, of course I do. But he said, I don't find him in your church. I said, what? I said, hey, no, I'm a pastor. He said, I know you're a pastor. I heard about you. I said, okay. And so I left the behind the tables, grabbed a plate of Brussels sprouts. That's all I had that I could eat. And went down and sat beside him on the trailer there and just sat with him. He told me how he had been to Boys Town, and he said, that's church, that's not for me. I said, I'm so sorry. I said, that's not church. I said, that's not church. He said, it affected my whole life as a young person, he said. I was never the same beautiful child that my mother raised. And I said, it's not church. He said, I had a massive life-changing experience. He said, as a young kid, he said, I just got my license and I was driving with my grandfather and had a horrific accident, and I killed my grandfather. And he said, nearly killed myself. And he said, as I was there on the emergency bed, he said, all I want to do is just die. And he said, I could feel my life just going from me. But he said, then someone touched me and said, Norm. And so I looked around, and he said, it was a beautiful face of a beautiful white being. And he said, this person said to me, Norm, I have a plan for your life. I have a reason to bring you back. And that was a positive influence that Norm needed. And he was able to heal from that and set about his life mission. And that to him was to have his family and that cared for. And he said, that's how God spoke to me. And he said, I have been living that ever since, and it keeps me going. And I said, now? And he said, well, yeah. I said, now you got cancer? He said, I'll beat this. He said, I've got God, and God speaks to me. I said, that's great, and that's positive. And I just yesterday went down to the same site, same spot, and this time I've got 5 people feeding people, so I don't have to do any work. I spoke to the leader of the doctors, and she said, we saw you talking to Norm, that's the first time he's ever talked to anyone. He doesn't talk to us. And I said, we had a wonderful time. And she said, he's very, very crook. And I said, he told me. Next minute, yesterday, Norm walks across the car park. Not his time to see the doctors, but he knows he's in trouble. His legs are just swelling, and he's just looking absolutely grey and awful. And the doctors made way and called him straight into the caravan. And he said, before I come, I want to go and see the pastor. And I was able to have a word of prayer with him as he went in. And I said, you got hope? He said, God's with me. I don't know where he is today. I hope he's okay. But to me, that was a God moment this week that spoke volumes into a guy who can sometimes be a workaholic, a guy who sometimes takes on too much, a guy who can rush into his life and not make room for God to speak into my life and to show me his values. You see, all too often, Loren Pratt, and I guess you're the same, has many other voices speaking into his head. And we all have those voices, and all too often we listen to those voices too much. When Jesus says, listen to me, my words are life. Jesus says, stand on my promises of Christ the King. Through eternal ages, let those praises ring. How's it with you? Are you like me? Too many other voices ringing in my head that I can't hear the praises of God speaking to me in the moments where I especially need him. We've got some friends. It's called Peter and John. They were similar. They were very similar. Let's come to their story. In our story for the day, Matthew chapter 17. Matthew 17, we'll start at verse 1. Matthew 17, and we'll start at verse 1. And although it's a 2,000-year-old story and we're walking in the footsteps of Jesus again, we find that Jesus wants us to follow his footsteps today. Matthew 17 and verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter and James and his brother John and led them up high on a mountain by themselves. He was transfigured in front of them, and his face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as light. Suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. I'll set up 3 shelters here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Then the disciples heard this, and they fell to face down and were terrified. Jesus came up and touched them and said, Get up, don't be afraid. When they looked up and saw no one except Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, Don't tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. So the disciples asked him, Why do the scribes say Elijah must come first? Elijah is coming and will restore everything, he replied. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they didn't recognize him. On the contrary, they did whatever they pleased to him. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he spoke to them about John the Baptist. As I read this passage this week, I have got pages and pages and pages of notes, about 25, 30. There's just so much in this story. And of course, it's not about what you put in, it's about what you can take out. And I've had to cut it back to 4 pages. And so if you want to learn more about this story, you're going to have to read it for yourself and just open the word and just drink it in. Just ask yourself after every sentence, why, what, where? Why, what, where? Today I want to focus on a few little points of it, and I think it's the word of God for us today. You see, the transfiguration of Jesus is a very difficult concept for us to get. Jesus talks with him, Peter, James and John, and takes them up to a mountaintop. And upon arriving, Jesus is transfigured and his face is changed. And then appearing with them is Moses and Elijah. And then what happens? Peter gets caught up in the moment and says, let's build a monument here or a shelter here. One to you, Jesus, one to Elijah, and one to Moses. Peter wanted to freeze frame that beautiful experience of heaven that he was seeing. And many times, aren't we just like that? But before he can finish his thoughts, a voice from heaven speaks. A voice from heaven speaks. So Peter's in this frame of, let's build a monument. Let's build a memorial to what we have here, and let's freeze all this. After all, it's a wonderful experience. Here you have Jesus looking the best we've ever seen him, glorified. Here you have Elijah and Moses. Moses represented the law, one of the guiding lights that guided people through history and told the Jewish people that they were the children of the promise. Nothing wrong with that. Really beautiful. On the other side, you've got Elijah, the man who stood for God in every situation that came to him. The man that was able to call down fire from heaven and do a miracle, and God acted for him and sorted out the people. Fit in very well with their theology, fit in very well with their picture of Jesus. And so you have here two things. You've got on one hand the law, one of the great guiding lights of the Jewish people. You have here the marvelous works of Jesus, of God for them. Another one of the great guiding lights of the people through their history. Think of parting the waters of the sea and people going through and God saving them that night. Think of the angel of death going over the house and keeping their firstborns that night. Think of all the miracle of the water from the rock. They were guided by these beautiful miracles that told them that God was with them. They were children of the promise. Today, we are similar. We have beautiful history of the way God has guided this church all through the past. Beautiful stories, beautiful miracles that tell us that God is with us and we are children of the promise. We have the 10 Commandments, just like Moses gave to the people. We have those today, and they tell us that God is with us and we are children of the promise. But all too often, we live in Moses and Elijah land. We live in the law, and we bash each other with that. Or we go on the other hand, oh, give me another high, give me another mountaintop experience. Give me another miracle so I know that God is with me and I'm a child of the promise. And we live in that. And those extremes are very prominent in our church. But right in the middle of that, while Peter's thinking those thoughts, what does a voice from heaven say? Here in our passage it says, while he was speaking, verse 5, suddenly a cloud appeared over them and a voice from the cloud said, this is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him. Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard those words before? Back in Matthew 3, I think it is. Matthew 3. I'm trying to get my finger in that passage. Matthew 3, and you'll find here the baptism of Jesus. And it's in verse 16. When Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water. The heavens suddenly opened for him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, coming down upon him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Those words were spoken by God at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. His baptism was a symbol of was a starting of the 3.5 years of ministry. You see, when we're baptized, it's more than just learning beliefs and then being baptized. Baptism says to the church, I'm joining this family of faith and I'm starting my ministry. If you notice, after Jesus was baptized, all the preaching and the miracles and the parables and the life of Jesus is recorded in the Gospels all happened in those 3.5 years. We don't hear much of the other 28, 30 odd years of his life. So baptism is more about I'm joining God's people of promise. I'm joining God's chosen people, those who follow Jesus. I'm living my ministry with him. And that's a bookend at the start of Jesus' ministry. The bookend at the other end, when Jesus is about to go down to Jerusalem, about to start the sufferings and going down to the cross, which was his mission, we see again, at the start of that mission, it's so significant, the words of God saying, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." It's almost commissioning words for two of the greatest parts of Jesus' life, his ministry and his sacrifice. And we find these two sentences there. But there's one difference. There's one difference in this second time that God says these words. You'll find here it says there, listen to him. Listen to him. From the mountains here, we get a picture of what heaven will be like. But on this mountain here, it says, don't let the mountaintop experience prevent you from listening to Jesus. From the mountaintop experience, they know they are the promised people. But God says, don't let the fact that you're the promised people stop you from listening to Jesus every day in your everyday life. A little boy was blind from birth. And a specialist said, I have an operation that just might give him back his sight. And his parents took the risk. And post-operation, the little child opened his eyes, and for the very, very first time, he looked at his mother. But he didn't know her. Knowing only the sound of her voice and the touch of her hand for his whole life. But when his mother spoke his name, his little arms went round her neck, because he knew who she really was, his mother. And he said, Mum, is this heaven? It was at least a foretaste of what heaven will be like for him. I can't wait for the day that Jesus comes back. I've done too many funerals. I've sat through with families and people through too much pain as a pastor to realize that we wait for the mountaintop experience. But we are here, and we must hear his voice through his word and allow him to touch our lives with his touch. Sometimes his healing touch. Sometimes his touch of assurance, sometimes his touch of comfort. There's that old song we love to sing, "Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of heaven divine." How's it with you? Are you experiencing a foretaste of heaven divine in your life this morning, in your life this week, in your life right now? When we see him, it will be heaven. In the meantime, we need to have his touch and his voice so that we know him when he comes back. The disciples had a really difficult time with this. Yes, Peter, James and John saw Jesus now glorified and in the transfiguration, but still that didn't translate to their everyday life. Peter says, "Lord, I'll go with you even to death." Jesus said, "I tell you, Peter, the rooster will crow 3 times. And in those times, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. John 6, then he came to Simon Peter and he said to him, "Lord, Lord, do you wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You don't know what I'm doing now, but you'll understand later." John chapter 6. Peter said to him, "You'll never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "If I don't wash your feet, you'll have no part with me." Simon said to him, "Lord, Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head." 2 experiences of Peter up and down. But don't they mirror our life? And don't they tell us that we need today to know the hand and the heart of Jesus? We need to hear the voice of Jesus in our everyday life, and we can't just leave it for mountaintop experiences. All too often, we quest for that mountaintop experience. We quest for that. We're born for that. We love the stories of Moses on the mountain. We love the stories of Elijah. We love the stories of Jesus on the mountain when many of his miracles occurred. We translate that to our everyday lives. We go seeking with our phones for sermons of evangelists who'll give us mountaintop experiences and glory and joy. We try and go to that big church where we'll hear that guest speaker that will transform us in some way. We try going to and read that book, watch that DVD, go to that seminar. When Jesus says, "I want to know your voice now and who you are." One more story. Peter in a boat on the water. "Lord, Lord, if it's you, call me and I'll walk on water." He works out it's Jesus. He hops out. He walks on water until he takes his eyes off Jesus and he sinks. Jesus hops in that boat amidst the storm, amidst the rage, and says, "Peace, be still." And that's what we need to hear in our lives today. You see, the mountaintop experiences are few and far between. And we can't just live our lives on mountaintop experiences. Jesus knew for those disciples that the only way they're going to get through the sufferings with him, and they didn't, was if they had an experience of Jesus every day and heard his voice, heard him speak. You and I may need this morning to hear Jesus say, "Peace, be still, child," over that illness, over those finances, over that marriage, over that relationship, over those plans, over that foreclosure, over that child. God said to his disciples, listen to Jesus. Don't look for the flashy stuff that you're seeing here. Listen to Jesus. And it proved very difficult for them until they saw Jesus crucified. Peter went out that night broken-hearted with Judas. Peter found Jesus afresh. And now he's known as one of the greatest evangelists this world's ever seen because he got a picture, a vision of Jesus. A Jesus that was with him every day. A Jesus that was with him in the jail cell. A Jesus that was with him on the mountaintop. A Jesus that was with him in the temple. A Jesus that was with him while he walked the dusty roads. Today, you and I walk dusty roads. We have challenges, but we need to listen to Jesus. We have the Bible, the written stories of Jesus, and his sayings to convince us. Not of the big flashy stuff, not of the, I'll prove to you this, I'll prove to you that. But the gospel is written there for you and I to know personally his love and mercy. And when I'm talking to people on their deathbed, when they're facing death, I talked to one 2 weeks ago, they're not wanting everything else. They're wanting to know, where can I find love and mercy? And yet, Jesus says you'll find it not with a church that has a big flashy name on its front sign, on its front gatepost or door, not with a powerful big booming sounds and lights, but you'll find it, Jesus says, you'll find my people because they'll be known by their love. They'll be known by their love. What about our voices? Who's speaking to us this morning? Who are you allowing inside your head? And how can we make sure that we're not hearing our own voice? 4 things. 4 things. 1, come to Christ with your request for guidance. God's voice has to have authority over every other voice in your life. Number 1, come to God. Number 2, how to know God, how to know his voice is wait in silence for God to speak to you for 10 to 15 minutes. All too often we rush and don't give God the silence. Listen to what God is saying to you. What themes are emerging in that time? What becomes clear about God's plan as you listen to him? So 1, come to Christ with your requests. 2, in the silence, let God speak to you. 3, jot down scripture songs and impressions of pictures that God's giving you. And 4, share with someone how God is answering your prayer requests. There is great comfort when we hear and obey the voice of God. God's telling his disciples here in this passage to listen to Jesus. God's telling you and I this morning to listen to Jesus. Imagine you're a worker and you're working for the largest company in the world. Toyota. Well, they're the 4th largest company. But you've got a job there. Imagine that your job is lowest of the ranks. Well, you can't get any lower than this. Sweeping. You're sweeping the floors around these beautiful cars that are being made. It's the lowest rank possible. And you're one of the most wicked people that's working for this company. You're one of the most wicked people anyone can ever imagine because you're stealing from the company for your selfish gain. One day, you meet an old guy who joins you as a fellow sweeper of the floor. He's warm, he's friendly, and you start enjoying his company, and you enjoy going to work just to work with him because he's a good guy. And you start getting influenced by him, and you're starting to feel convicted of all the wrong things you've been doing in the company. But no matter how hard you try, you're unable to change because of your condition that you're in. One day, that old guy takes you into a small room and removes his mask and reveals who he really is. You get to know him, that he is the owner of the company, the boss of all bosses. Imagine that this man talking to you knows you by name, and even though he was a fellow sweeper, he reveals to you that of all the millions and millions of people that applied for the job of sweeper, he chose you. He chose you to work in his company. Imagine how that would make you feel. Now imagine him telling you that he always knew how wicked, lazy, and crook you were, but he still wanted you. He wanted you around him. And he never, ever wanted you to see you leave the company or suffer. Even after sending his manager to correct and rebuke you with, you never changed. And the only way to change you was if he himself would come down to your level and reveal himself to you. Tell me, how would this make you feel? Now imagine him telling you that the day you joined the company, you're also assigned shares in the company. That you're not just a sweeper, but a partner in the company. Will this experience do something for you? You see, church, this is an earthly scenario, which sounds so exciting, but it's the reality in our spiritual life. This is you, this is me, and this is what happens to us in heavenly realms. You see, this is the picture that Jesus tried to give Peter, James, and John that evening on the Mount of Transfiguration. And this is the picture that he wants to give you and I this morning. The purpose of the Transfiguration was to reveal Jesus in all his glory, so that it changed their lives from within and they resembled him to the world. You know what? They did it. They did it. This book has stories of them that they wrote. They caught it. This morning, the same world has millions of people who need to catch a vision of the transfiguration of Jesus. They don't need to catch it in great big fancy lights. They need to catch it in people whose lives have changed because they see Jesus who he really is. Those who witnessed the transfiguration became witnesses to the other disciples that day. And they became witnesses to countless millions down through the ages. And this morning, if Jesus was standing here, he'd say, come follow my footsteps. Come, church, be a part of this great story.
That was amazing. Thank you,